7 Ways is Jamie Oliver's new book of 2020. If you don't know Jamie Oliver, he's a British chef and restaurateur. He's known for having very simple cuisine and easy to follow cookbooks. Jamie Oliver has written a bunch of cookbooks and is on plenty of TV shows. I mean, he writes a cookbook every year. I mean, look at this list, it's ginormous. He also does a bunch of different shows. I've seen him in a couple of series, like the one where he goes to America and tries to fix the school lunch system.
One man is coming to lead a food revolution.
Yo! What's up, diggity dogs?
I just remember the scene where he blends a bunch of chicken bones and chicken tissue and then turns it into a McNugget and all the kids still eat it. And he's like, oh my god. I'm honestly not the biggest fan of Jamie Oliver. I think some of his past actions weren't that great. And I don't really like his personality too much. But I'm not gonna let that opinion affect my viewings of this cookbook. I like to separate the art from the artist. So I think the theme of this book is interesting. He limits himself to using 7 ingredients for each recipe. Sometimes giving yourself a restraint like that can bring out creativity, but I think here it's not so great. But for some highlights of this book, I think the pictures are very nice and very clean. Some of the pictures are kind of strange, like the sweet potato burger picture. It looks like he's throwing the bun at the burger, which is a little weird to me. It also has a picture of each ingredient on the left of every recipe, which I think looks very clean and helps bring together this book. I also like how each recipe has a calorie count at the bottom, though I don't know how accurate this is because sometimes they'll have BBQ sauce, and depending on the barbecue sauce you get, it can either be very sweet or not that sweet. And that's just one example of the variation, but it's just good to have a guideline like that. I also like that it has a serving portions and the times. I think this book is good for someone who wants to make a quick and easy meal on the weekday. It just seems like a book you would grab when you don't know what to do and you want to eat something very quick. There's different categories in this book, and each category is centered around a main ingredient that he uses for each recipe. At first I thought this was really convenient and kind of grouped everything together, but then as I went through the recipes, it's a little confusing because he jumps between different regions. So you'll have recipes with potato, but some of them will be Indian, or some of them will be British, or some of them will be East Asian. And to me, that's too many ingredients you have to use. Some of them use black bean paste, some of them use curry. It's a lot of specialty ingredients for someone. I wish instead he grouped ingredients together, so he would have an Indian section maybe, and then they could have subsections on potatoes or mushrooms. And going back to using a 7th ingredient, sometimes the 7th ingredient could be omitted. Like there's sprouting crest with the sesame salmon, and I feel like that doesn't add anything, it's more decoration. It felt like they needed a 7th ingredient, so they said, okay, let's just add the sprouting crest just to have that 7th ingredient. It doesn't feel very purposeful. And sometimes there's more than 7 ingredients that might be needed, but because of the rules of the book, they can't do that. So I feel like at first the 7th ingredient book was a good idea, but then later on going through the recipes, I realized it just kind of limited them too much. Also for meats, there's no temperature guide. It just says to sear them for a certain amount of time. I really wish there was a temperature chart in the beginning of this book, but oh well. There's also kind of some strange recipes, like there's a Japanese steak sandwich, which does exist, but for some reason this has just steak and wasabi. I've never really seen this before, and I think it's kind of strange. Also the Mexican meatloaf. This is like a weird fusion food that I really don't think would work. I think the recipes in this book that excel are the British and European ones, which makes sense because Jamie Oliver is British and he's more familiar with European food. Another problem I have with this book is the instructions are very confusing. They're not listed out like normal instructions. Instead, it's a paragraph of text, which can kind of get confusing if you're constantly cooking and then looking back at the recipe. I think you'll get lost very easily. I really like recipes that have numbers and steps because it's easier to keep track. I think this book would be much better if it was a little more well thought out in terms of recipe and recipe instructions. I feel like it's a little slapped together. I like the ideas in this book, but I wouldn't recommend this book. It's not the best way to learn how to cook. It doesn't specialize in anything interesting. It just kind of goes over everything very quickly. I feel like I never conveyed how to properly cook anything. I think this book is interesting for the right person, maybe someone who just wants very, very simple recipes and kind of doesn't want to dig too deep into certain dishes. But for me, it's not my kind of book, and I kind of don't recommend this book for most people. That's why I'm giving this book a 4 out of 10.